The human exhibit wasn't where Dr. Xylara typically spent her research hours. The Galactic Anthropological Museum prided itself on the remnants of civilizations long extinct, their ruins mapped and their artifacts analyzed with meticulous care. Humans, however, were decidedly not extinct. They were loud, numerous, and some days a particularly irritating thorn in the side of the esteemed Vektri Council. Yet, here she was, not drawn by duty, but an unexplainable sense of curiosity. The display was titled Earth, Everyday Oddities. She scoffed softly. With their cluttered cities, dissonant music, and relentless expansionism, what about humanity could be considered odd? A flash of bright color caught her eye. A small, cubed object divided into garish squares sat beneath a protective case. 6 sides, each a solid, jarring hue: red, blue, yellow, green, orange, white. She tilted her head, her 3 eyes focusing on the intricate lines dividing the cube's faces. A child's toy? Primitive as expected, a snooty voice purred behind her. Xylara stiffened but didn't turn. Counselor Xylara, a political rival known more for ambition than intellect. Typical. I expect, Counselor, Xylara said evenly, that these objects, however rudimentary, represent some aspect of what drove human development. Xylara laughed, a high-pitched chirp that echoed oddly in the quiet exhibit. Development? You mean their inexplicable obsession with colonizing every habitable rock? Perhaps this cube was used in their bizarre mating rituals? Those always amuse me. Xylara kept her composure despite a surge of irritation. She peered closer at the cube. No discernible markings, no obvious mechanism. There must be a purpose, she murmured, more to herself than the annoying counselor. A purpose undoubtedly as crude and pointless as the species itself. With another laugh, Xylara flounced off, leaving Xylara alone with the strange little cube. She touched the sensor requesting access, and a low hum answered as the case lowered. The cube was surprisingly light in her palm, its plastic surfaces smooth and surprisingly cool. An instinctive urge made her twist one side. It moved easily, the colors shifting into a disarray of patterns on that face. Oddly compelling. Frowning, she twisted another side, and another. What possible function? Frustration tugged at the edge of her composure. The humans had achieved interstellar travel, no matter how gracelessly. Surely, they had not done so with simple children's playthings. Requesting the transfer of the objects to her lab raised more than a few eyebrows. It took an override of her standard research protocols and endured smug commentary from her assistant, Chiral. But the cube was nestled amongst her usual equipment within the week, an absurd splash of color amidst the gleaming instruments designed to decipher languages millennia dead. Xylara had begun with a structural analysis. The internal mechanism was remarkably simple, almost crude 6 intersecting axles with the colored squares attached. Material analysis yielded nothing unusual. For 2 days, she twisted, analyzed, and found absolutely nothing. Dr. Xylara, Chiral said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Perhaps it would be more fruitful to focus on Project Trinarian. The linguistic team on site believes they're close to deciphering. Later, she snapped the word out before she could stop herself. Xylara rarely lost her temper, but the cube mocked her with its silent, perplexing existence. Chiral retreated hastily. The breakthrough, when it came, was more revelation than discovery. Exhausted, she placed the cube on her desk and simply stared. There was a pattern, obvious in hindsight. Each face possessed 9 squares of a single color. The object could be solved. The colors aligned. But why? To what end? It wasn't an energy module, storage device, or any form of technology her team recognized. It was a puzzle, designed to be manipulated and then returned to its original state. Suddenly, an unsettling thought struck her. Was this truly indicative of some deep-rooted mental aptitude, or merely proof that the human mind craved meaningless distraction? Desperate for any insight, she delved into the archaic data net the humans themselves had created centuries ago. Scrolling through endless images, analyses, and historical archives, frustration began to build once more. There were references to the Rubik's Cube, but its primary function seemed to be entertainment. Entertainment. The very word felt alien in her mind. It was an inefficiency, a waste of intellectual resources. The Vektri valued knowledge, the mastery of skills, the progression along meticulously designed societal paths. This entertainment seemed frivolous, even disturbing. Yet, the cube was undeniable proof of its existence. The next item in her borrowed collection merely deepened the enigma. A bright yellow figure, vaguely resembling the Terran waterfowl known as a duck, floated upon a miniature pond Xylara had replicated in the lab. Chiral had openly laughed when she requisitioned aquatic environmental controls. It was, without a doubt, a child's toy. The material was pliant, waterproof, and entirely unsophisticated. Its simplistic form held little to suggest complex purpose. Xylara squeezed it experimentally, causing an embarrassing squeak that echoed in the sterile lab. "Just admit it, Doctor," Chiral said with exasperation. "Humanity's rise is a galactic fluke. We'll never understand how a species obsessed with floating animals managed to breach the stars." His words echoed her private fears a little too closely. For decades, the Vektri had assumed humanity's rapid ascension was merely a stroke of luck, or, more darkly, evidence of some nefarious deception concealing a greater scheme. Xylara stalked to the pond setup, more annoyed with herself than her assistant. Careful logic was the foundation of Vektri achievements. Yet, this absurd yellow creature had shaken her certainty. It had to be more than a toy. A sensor array detected minute pressure changes emanating from the duck when it was submerged. Was it a primitive pressure gauge? Overly elaborate for child's play, but the design seemed too simple for scientific data collection. For days, she experimented, meticulously studying the readings with every variation of pressure, temperature, and water composition she could conceive. The results were maddeningly inconsistent. Just when she was ready to dismiss the duck as an elaborate human joke at the expense of the galaxy's esteemed scientists, an accident occurred. A sonic disruptor, used for a completely different experiment, malfunctioned. The blast hit the pond, and the duck emitted an ear-splitting shriek. The entire lab went dead silent. Xylara stared at the unassuming little figure, her mind racing. Sound manipulation? Sonar? Chiral was gaping. He flicked the sonic log readings across the main display, his eyes widening. "Doctor, the frequencies the duck emitted," he stammered. "They're a near-perfect match for the disruptor blast." The Polaroid camera was the simplest of the three objects, at least in its external construction. Yet, in the age of instantaneous holographs, the physical printouts it produced felt archaic, almost barbaric. Xylara could replicate the technology with her personal fabricator in minutes. However, it wasn't the construction that baffled her, but the peculiar delay. Why wouldn't the humans, obsessed with efficiency as they were, value instant gratification? Was the camera malfunctioning? Yet, when she sought information on the data net, it revealed countless images preserved by this device during the early stages of their technological development. Page after page showcased the human's strange obsession with capturing still moments. She held up one printout retrieved from the archives. A human child, a miniature of its species, grinned with a mixture of pride and mischief, holding up some unidentifiable object. It was ordinary. There was no grand event captured, no momentous achievement. Just a small being, frozen in a single, unexceptional moment in time. Xylara had never paused to consider a moment as something worthy of preservation. Her species, the Vektri, possessed near-perfect memory. The past existed as a database within her own mind, meticulously organized and accessible at will. The concept of savoring the granular fragments of now was utterly foreign. They were nostalgic, a voice startled her. Xylara spun to see Xylara, a junior researcher barely a third her own age. Xylara stared at the human image with an unnerving intensity. "This child," Xylara continued haltingly, "they know they will grow, change. Yet, they wish to hold this version of themselves still." She looked at Xylara, a strange plea in her eyes. "Do you think they feared forgetting?" Xylara had no answer. The Vektri celebrated progress, the constant striving towards knowledge and self-improvement. Lingering on what had come before felt pointless at best, and perhaps even a sign of mental weakness. Yet, the camera, more than the cube or the duck, truly began to shift something in her perception of the inexplicable species called humanity. The Rubik's Cube yielded its secret in the most infuriating way imaginable. Chiral, always impatient and surprisingly skilled with the data net, had taken a break from his assigned work. When she approached, intending to reprimand him, Chiral was gleefully twisting the cube, its colors aligning with maddening ease. "Doctor," he crowed, holding it aloft. "A child could solve this. Look, I found instructions online from their primitive information archive." He shoved a flimsy data sheet under her nose, illustrating simple maneuvers with crudely drawn graphics. The revelation felt like a physical blow. She, a renowned xeno-archaeologist with 8 academic citations to her name, had been outdone by instructions intended for human children and unearthed by her flippant assistant. Humiliation burned, but instead of the expected anger, a strange, cold feeling settled over her. Was the universe itself mocking her? Had the key to this infuriating puzzle existed freely all along, while she'd painstakingly built elaborate hypotheses based on nothing? "Get back to work, Chiral," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Catalog the Trinarian linguistic data. It should suit you better than puzzles." Alone, she stared at the perfectly ordered cube, then viciously scrambled it. The human guide offered an easy solution. Each face could be aligned by following a simple algorithm, a set of steps. And so what? The puzzle didn't create anything, didn't reveal new knowledge, didn't enhance the solver in any measurable way. It merely returned itself to its original state, ready to be scrambled again. The pointlessness of it struck her with more force than any prior analysis. Perhaps this was the key she'd been missing. Not a hidden function, but the absence of function. The humans had crafted an object whose sole purpose was the process itself, the twisting, the aligning, the fleeting satisfaction of a resolved pattern, only to be undone. It was maddening. It was wasteful. It was also undeniably brilliant in its cruel simplicity. Counselor Xylara was not one to miss an opportunity. News of Dr. Xylara's obsession with human trinkets had spread. What began as whispers among colleagues had become open mockery echoing through the hallowed halls of the Vektri Grand Symposium. The hearing was swift, a formality designed to strip Xylara of authority, maybe even her research access. The council sat impassively as Xylara, sleek and composed, detailed Xylara's descent into unscientific absurdity. The cube, the duck, the camera, each item was dissected. The very act of their examination turned into evidence of Xylara's failing mind. Xylara presented her findings thus far with meticulous detail. She emphasized not the purpose of the objects themselves, but the hints they offered about the unique workings of the human mind, the joy of the process, the deceptive simplicity of play, a fascination with the ephemeral. The council listened with stony faces, unimpressed. The vote for censure was expected, but not unanimous. Chiral, usually so dismissive, had submitted a formal defense of her methods. A few younger scholars, one she'd barely noticed while lost in her own research, raised cautious points about alternative paths of inquiry. Xylara smiled triumphantly, her victory secured. Yet, when Xylara exited the chamber, it wasn't with the crushing defeat she'd anticipated, but a strange, defiant curiosity. Later that night, in the solitude of her apartment, she retrieved a box from storage. Its contents, collected during a brief research trip to Earth decades prior, always filled her with a vague, undefined unease. Human art. Hideously asymmetrical sculptures, paintings filled with clashing colors, and what they called music, a cacophony of dissonant sounds. She pulled out a book of poetry, its verses seemingly random arrangements of words that hinted at emotion but never yielded true meaning. With newfound determination, Xylara sat down. It was time to approach these not as artifacts to be categorized, but as mysteries to be unraveled with the same obsessive focus she'd mistakenly dedicated to a child's toy. Perhaps, like the cube, the solution lay not in a single definitive answer, but in the exploration itself. The shift in perception was gradual, yet profound. Xylara began observing her fellow Vektri with a strange, detached curiosity. Their lives, so focused on efficiency and the pursuit of knowledge, suddenly seemed sterile. There was no joy in the act of learning itself, merely the relentless drive towards the next milestone, the next breakthrough, the next data point to be categorized and absorbed. The humans, by contrast, were maddeningly inefficient. Their cities were chaotic sprawls, their art defied all sense of aesthetic balance, and their politics, well, the less said about their attempts at governance, the better. However, amidst the noise, there was a vibrancy that had eluded her notice before. Their marketplaces were filled with color, with scents and sounds that seemed designed to assault the senses. Strange devices emitted what they called music, often at volumes that seemed physically uncomfortable. People argued passionately over seemingly trivial matters, their faces animated with an intensity Xylara had never witnessed in the council chambers. There was a messy, almost reckless aliveness in how they seemed to experience the world. She ventured into an art gallery, a human construct devoted entirely to the creation and display of objects that served no practical purpose. Paintings, sculptures, installations, these were not records of history, nor scientific models, but expressions of something intangible: emotion, experience, perspectives as varied and chaotic as the species itself. For the first time, she looked without the urge to analyze, but simply to see. A sculpture caught her eye. It was a crudely formed approximation of the human form, its surface not smooth, but roughly textured, marked with deliberate imperfections. The data plaque provided little enlightenment. Self-portrait by an artist long dead. Gazing at it, Xylara felt a strange resonance, almost a sense of kinship. This was not a celebration of achievement, nor a testament to skill. It was imperfect, incomplete, and reflected a mind grappling with its own place in the universe, perhaps even confronting its limitations. The humans, it seemed, created not just out of a thirst for knowledge, but from a need to express something messy, unfinished, and unquantifiable about their own existence. Word of her unorthodox experiments reached the human delegation housed within an isolated enclave on the Vektri homeworld. Ambassador Ren Tanaka, known more for his sly political maneuvering than a deep interest in scientific curiosities, requested a formal audience. Xylara braced herself. Humans were relentlessly direct, and their humor was often sharp, concealing underlying offense. Her current, marginalized status likely wouldn't grant her any protection. Yet, the ambassador was surprisingly gracious. "Dr. Xylara," he said, his voice smooth, "we have been intrigued by reports of your current work." She inclined her head. "It is a modest project, Ambassador. I hardly think it worthy of your notice." Ren merely smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Forgive our bluntness, but are you not essentially studying the purpose of play?" Xylara felt a surge of irritation. Play was still a concept she struggled to grasp. However, her pride wouldn't allow her to show ignorance before this irritatingly astute human. "Perhaps," she admitted, "but what I seek are the underlying cognitive mechanisms that lead to such activities, especially in a species so undeniably intelligent in other areas." Ren chuckled. "Intelligent, perhaps. Wise? Not necessarily." He gestured to a display on the far wall. A holographic image flickered into existence. A group of primates, a pre-evolved ancestor species of humanity, engaged in some form of rough-and-tumble activity. Play, he explained, exists in many forms across numerous Earth species. Primates, our close relatives, engage in it from a young age. It teaches them physical skills, coordination, social dynamics. It is, in essence, practice for survival, but wrapped in the neurochemical rewards of enjoyment. He paused, then his smile widened. "But you, Doctor, are studying adult play. This is where it gets interesting, because at the base level, it is still practice, but for far more complex skills, problem solving outside the box, pattern recognition, adaptability. And sometimes," Ren's voice dropped, "it's simply a way to stave off the existential dread." Xylara was silent for a long moment. Dread? Ren nodded slowly. Ah, it seems the long-lived Vektri are not so unfamiliar with this concept after all. The revelation hit her like a meteor impact in the quiet solitude of her lab. Not dread, exactly. The Vektri didn't experience the gnawing, emotional fear humans felt about their own mortality. But there was a hollowness, a growing awareness of the vast stretches of time, knowledge endlessly accumulated, yet without the enjoyment she began to reluctantly recognize in her research subjects. Chiral, increasingly bold since the hearing, poked his head in. Doctor, a priority message from Xylara. Remember that junior researcher, the one obsessed with the human nostalgia. Xylara did. The young woman had begun requesting access to human historical records, not the rigorously objective data Xylara was accustomed to, but personal accounts, diaries, even what the humans called fiction. Well, Xylara said impatiently, Xylara was brilliant but prone to distraction. Chiral grinned. She asked me to inform you with great ceremony, he said, puffing out his chest, that humans do not, in fact, fear forgetting. They simply have. He struggled to pronounce the unfamiliar words. A bittersweet fondness for their own past selves. Xylara waved him away. Fondness. For what? The string of failed projects, the errors in judgment, the cringe-worthy social blunders that were an inevitable part of growth. It made no sense, yet it echoed an idea that had been burrowing into her own mind for weeks. Perhaps the relentless pursuit of knowledge, without an appreciation of the journey itself, was its own kind of failure. The summons to the Grand Council a week later should have filled her with trepidation. Instead, she found herself straightening her posture, feeling a sliver of grim anticipation. Xylara and her allies would relish the opportunity to tear into her eccentric research, to further condemn her descent from scientific rigor. But this time, Xylara was ready. The chamber was stifling, the air heavy with expectation. Xylara rose, her voice cutting through the stillness. Dr. Xylara, we've reconvened today to determine your continued suitability in conducting research vital to the advancement of Vektri knowledge. She smiled thinly. Or perhaps we are here to witness the final chapter of a once respected scientist's decline. Chiral, standing behind Xylara, as was customary for assistants, sent her a nervous glance. He clearly expected her to bow to Xylara's thinly veiled authority, to apologize, to claw back some shred of her dignity by admitting defeat. Counselors, Xylara began, her voice stronger than she'd anticipated. I stand by my findings. While my initial hypothesis regarding the artifacts was flawed, my exploration has yielded significant insights into a species we've gravely underestimated. The murmurs began as expected. Xylara looked smug, but others stirred with curiosity, a reaction Xylara hadn't seen before. She pointed to a display projecting a complex data visualization. Not her usual charts of linguistic patterns or artifact analysis, but a web she'd tentatively titled Human Thought Dynamics. It pulsed with color, with nodes diverging and intertwining. This, she explained, is a representation, admittedly imperfect, of how humans process information. Not linearly, not driven purely by logic, but with what I can only term creative chaos. Chaos, a senior counselor interrupted, his voice filled with disapproval. This is an insult, Xylara. But before she could respond, a younger counselor, Raval, known for his unorthodox views, spoke up. Xylara, continue. I confess, this creative chaos intrigues me. Heartened, Xylara gestured towards the display. The humans derive solutions from unexpected connections, their play builds cognitive flexibility, and their preservation of fleeting moments teaches an awareness of the present, a concept my people could perhaps benefit from. She met Xylara's gaze. Perhaps the humans are not the illogical, inferior beings we believed. Perhaps it is time for us to play. The silence after her proclamation was deafening. Xylara sputtered, then drew herself up to her full height. Play? Are you suggesting we become like children? Abandon our centuries of progress, of hard-won knowledge, for the sake of idle amusement? This time, the murmurs weren't of condemnation, but a ripple of unease mixed with fascination. Xylara herself wasn't sure what play would even look like in Vektri society, yet the stifling weight of expectation that had pressed upon her for weeks had undeniably lightened a fraction. To her surprise, the answer came not from her, but from Chiral. Emboldened by the shift in the council's attention, he stepped forward. "Respected counselors, Dr. Xylara's research, unconventional though it may be, has sparked something within our own community. Junior researchers, myself included, have begun collaborations." He hesitated, then barreled on. "We're exploring those human archives of art, seeking not just to analyze, but to create." Xylara rose then, her voice unwavering. "The human concept of emotion is complex, yet their artistic expression, however baffling at first, resonates on a level our purely intellectual pursuits do not." Her eyes swept the council. "There is a longing I sense amongst my peers, a yearning for something we cannot define, but that the humans seem to possess in abundance." Raval, the young and open-minded counselor, cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he started tentatively, "what we need is not censure, but experimentation. Could we introduce elements of this playfulness, on a controlled scale, into early educational protocols, observe the results, reassess?" The council devolved into heated debate. This was unprecedented. The Vektri prized order, the mastery of knowledge, the carefully laid out paths one followed from youth to their most productive years. Play, art, the expression of emotion, these were wild, untamed concepts, anathema to their meticulously structured way of life. The council did not endorse Xylara's work that day, nor did they fully censure it. What they allowed was a monitored experiment, a designated group of young Vektri exposed to carefully curated examples of human creative expression. Xylara and her team would analyze the results not for proof of intellectual advancement, but for less quantifiable changes, levels of stress, collaboration, unexpected innovation. Xylara returned to her lab, not with triumph, but a strange sense of anticipation. The path forward was uncertain, a chaotic branching of possibilities that made her old, rigorous work feel stifling by comparison. That evening, she dug out a human device she'd dismissed upon first inspection. They called it a paint set crude pigments, brushes made of animal hair, and a flimsy material called paper. It was all so primitive compared to a fabrication unit that could render any image in holographic perfection. Hesitantly, she dipped a brush into a vial of deep blue. There was no goal, no plan, just the urge to leave a mark upon the blank surface. The first stroke was clumsy, uneven. The second felt oddly liberating. "Perhaps," she mused, "this is where understanding begins. Not by meticulously analyzing the chemical composition of the paint, nor studying the history of human art movements, but in the simple act of creation. Messy, imperfect, and utterly necessary." Chiral stuck his head in, then blinked in surprise at the array of paints splayed across her workspace. "Doctor," he began. "Later," she muttered, focused on blending streaks of yellow into the wash of blue. He hesitated. Then, to her astonishment, he grinned. "I understand, Doctor. Permission to experiment with those linguistic anomalies I discovered in their music archives." "Permission granted," she said absently. The blue now swirled with green. It was amateurish, even hideous, and that was the point. Chiral left, whistling some disharmonious melody that was unquestionably human in origin. Xylara smiled and returned to her canvas. For the first time in decades, she wasn't sure what the outcome would be. That, it seemed, was the heart of this creative chaos, and it was undeniably invigorating. The experiment, as they started calling it, was not without its detractors. Xylara became the voice of the conservative bloc, her speeches filled with references to the decline of standards, the dangers of emotional instability, and thinly veiled predictions of societal collapse, should the Vektri stray from their established paths. Yet, the experiment also had its champions. Raval, the far-sighted counselor, argued for patience and long-term analysis. Chiral published a surprisingly insightful paper titled, Play as iterative innovation, a potential Vektri paradigm shift, sending shockwaves through the academic community. And, quietly, Xylara herself worked with Xyara's team, finding unexpected patterns and potentials within the chaos of human art and music. The young test subjects were bewildered at first. They'd been raised on meticulously optimized educational protocols, emphasizing the accumulation and application of knowledge. Suddenly being asked to finger paint, to compose nonsensical rhymes, or to enact scenes from what humans called theater, filled many with a strange mixture of confusion and rebellious glee. Monitoring the data was both frustrating and exhilarating. Stress levels initially spiked as the young Vektri struggled with assignments that lacked clear answers or pathways to success. However, collaboration soared, unexpected bonds formed, and Xyara's team unearthed a startling uptick in lateral thinking, a willingness to attempt unconventional solutions. One young participant, initially dismissed as below average, became fascinated with sound manipulation. His attempts at human music were, objectively, disastrous. However, they led him to reconfigure a standard environmental sensor, boosting its sensitivity far beyond the original parameters, opening a new avenue for studying atmospheric anomalies. It was an imperfect and painfully slow process. For every minor breakthrough, there were setbacks, fits of temper, and at least 3 deeply regrettable attempts at interpretive dance. But the old certainties Xylara once clung to began to crack, revealing a universe of possibility beyond rigid categorization. Word of the experiment leaked to the human delegation. Ambassador Tanaka requested an audience once more, but this time there was no mockery in his eyes, only keen interest. "Dr. Xylara," he began, inclining his head, "the path you are walking, it is a dangerous one, but also holds great promise." Xylara frowned. This human, usually so quick with a joke or a veiled insult, was unexpectedly sober. "Dangerous? How so?" "Change," Tanaka said simply, "is always dangerous. To question the foundations of your society, to introduce a degree of unpredictability. Your council is divided, are they not?" "That is an understatement," Xylara scoffed. "There are those who wish to shut down the experiment entirely." Tanaka nodded slowly. "Then you must succeed, spectacularly, because your work, whether you realize it yet, is questioning something far more fundamental than the role of play, or even art. The Vektri, forgive my bluntness, prize control. Control of the physical environment, control of knowledge, control of your own lives." He leaned forward, his tone growing intense. "But we humans have learned, often painfully, that control is an illusion. It gives the appearance of order, of safety, but also breeds stagnation. Humans thrive in chaos, Dr. Xylara. We adapt, find joy in the unexpected, because deep down we know," Tanaka paused, his smile wry, "that the universe itself is utterly indifferent to our need for rules." Xylara was speechless. The human saw what she had only begun to grasp. It was a terrifying and utterly thrilling revelation. The turning point came not from meticulous research data, but from an incident so absurd it toppled the last of Xylara's carefully reasoned arguments. A group of test subjects, obsessed with human theater, staged an improvisational performance within the hallowed halls of the symposium itself. It was meant to be comedic. It was anything but. The skit involved mistaken identities, nonsensical wordplay, and an alarming amount of prop malfunctions. Within minutes, the chamber descended into pandemonium. Several senior counselors were accidentally drenched by a misfiring water sprayer. Another was trapped within a malfunctioning wardrobe that spewed synthetic feathers, and the entire event culminated in a poorly choreographed food fight. The outrage was immediate and predictable. Censure motions flew, Xylara raged, and for a sickening moment, Xylara knew her experiment and likely her career was finished. Then an unexpected voice cut through the din. Counselor Raval, long known for his composure, stood covered in custard and a single, forlorn purple feather. To everyone's astonishment, he began to laugh. It was a rusty, uncertain sound at first, but soon it grew louder, a full-throated roar of genuine amusement. Others followed, first hesitantly, Then, with increasing abandon, Xylara, face streaked with tears of mirth, caught Xylara's eye, the relief and shared exhilaration clear between them. The laughter subsided. Raval wiped a tear from his eye. "Colleagues," he said, his voice still shaking with mirth, "perhaps we have misplaced our priorities. This chaos, this absurdity, it is a reminder that we are not algorithms, but living beings. Permission to join the experiment, Dr. Xylara? I clearly need to relearn a few things." In the aftermath of the custard incident, as it was mockingly dubbed, the experiment not only survived, but gained an odd momentum of its own. The scandal became the subject of endless jokes, whispered in corridors and slyly referenced in otherwise serious reports. The younger generation of Vektri, initially wary of the shift their elders struggled with, embraced it with enthusiasm. Finger-painting sessions broke out in labs, terrible poetry flourished, and impromptu musical duels echoed through research facilities. Xylara, to her own bewilderment, became something of a symbol. Not a brilliant researcher with any easily quantifiable achievement, but a figurehead for embracing the unexpected, the messy, the sometimes hilariously illogical aspects of existence that her people had systematically denied for centuries. Yet, the shift was not sudden, nor total. Xylara and her allies remained firmly opposed, though their cries of impending doom lost some of their impact. The Vektri were not about to abandon their core values, their deep-rooted pursuit of knowledge. But a vital crack had formed in the edifice of absolute order, and through that crack, new ideas began to unfurl. Collaboration became vital. Xylara, once a marginal researcher, found her insights in demand. Xylara, accustomed to solitary work, had to adapt to a constant barrage of questions, ill-formed concepts, and enthusiastic attempts at applying human philosophies to deeply ingrained Vektri systems. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and surprisingly effective. A breakthrough came from the most unexpected quarter. A team analyzing early childhood education discovered that introducing simple building toys, not for complex structure creation, but for unstructured play, led to increased focus and problem-solving abilities later on. The result was hesitant at first, a trial integration into preschool programs, but the long-term data was undeniable. This was the tipping point. When play, as a concept, could be proven to make the pursuit of knowledge more efficient, the old guard struggled to maintain their opposition. The experiment officially ended, its results not revolutionary, but a catalyst for a shift that was impossible to reverse. Ambassador Tanaka was summoned before the Grand Council. The tension in the chamber was thick, yet this time it wasn't directed at Xylara. "Ambassador," Xylara began, her voice dangerously smooth, "your species has introduced a disruptive element into our society. You have used Dr. Xylara's curiosity to sow a seed of discontent." Tanaka simply raised an eyebrow. "If a children's block set in a few dreadful poems can bring your meticulously ordered world tumbling down, Counselor, perhaps your foundations were less stable than you imagined." His audacity drew gasps, but there was a flicker of defiant amusement in some of the younger counselors' eyes. Xylara drew herself up, ready to deliver a scathing response, but Raval, ever the pragmatist, intervened. "Ambassador, this is neither the time nor the place for inflammatory rhetoric. The Vektri are undergoing a period of transition." He smiled wryly. "Change can be messy, as we've all learned." A tense silence fell, then Tanaka inclined his head. "In that case, allow me to make a proposal. A cultural exchange, a formal sharing of knowledge, not of scientific advancement, but of creative expression. Our artists, your scholars, working together to explore both our commonalities and our unique approaches to experiencing existence." The first human Vektri, creative convergence, was an exercise in barely controlled chaos. Vektri, renowned for their meticulous data analysis, found themselves paired with performance artists whose works defied explanation. Human musicians struggled to comprehend the complex mathematical structures underpinning Vektri sound manipulation, while Vektri poets were baffled by the emotional resonance embedded within seemingly nonsensical human verse. Breakdowns in communication were frequent. Tempers flared, and at least two interspecies shouting matches broke out. Yet, breakthroughs blossomed in the spaces between. A human sculptor, inspired by Vektri material science, developed a new alloy that shifted its form based on ambient temperature. A notoriously rigid Vektri logician, obsessed with untangling the narrative structure of a human film, accidentally stumbled upon a flaw in interstellar navigation software that had gone undetected for decades. Xylara cornered Xylara, her eyes bright. It's the iterative approach, just at a larger scale. They play with ideas, break them down, build them back differently. It's maddening, but brilliant. Xylara, observing a human dance troupe attempting to teach a group of utterly bewildered Vektri researchers the concept of improvisation, felt a grin spread across her own face. We should be terrified, she admitted, but I cannot deny the results. The galaxy may never be the same. Xylara, to her surprise, did not become a revolutionary leader, but simply a respected researcher once again. Yet, her work now focused on collaborative projects, on finding the points of friction and synergy between the structured Vektri mind and the gloriously chaotic human perspective. She even co-authored a paper with Ambassador Tanaka titled Diplomacy as Improvisational Theater, which caused a minor scandal and was promptly adopted as required reading for new Vektri diplomatic staff. Chiral, bolder than ever, shocked the academic community by setting his thesis defense to the accompaniment of a human-inspired techno-composition. The thesis itself was a brilliant analysis of logistical optimization, but his defense became legendary. 3 counselors walked out, 5 found themselves tapping their feet, and old Ravel grinned amidst the outrage, clearly recognizing a kindred spirit. The most profound shift, however, happened within Xylara herself. The rigid certainty that once defined her world was gone. She painted rarely and badly, but the process itself brought an odd satisfaction her old work never had. She learned to tolerate, even appreciate, the dissonant blast of sound Chiral called music. But mostly, she learned to embrace the unknown, to meet each day not with a meticulous plan, but the willingness to be caught off guard by the beauty, absurdity, and the enduring mystery of simply being. The call came unexpectedly, a request for her presence on a diplomatic vessel heading for Earth. The purpose was shrouded in the usual layers of political euphemism, something about cultural exchange and advisory roles. Tanaka met her at the spaceport, his grin wider than ever. "Ah, Dr. Xylara, so good of you to join us. This is an unusual mission, even for me." She raised an eyebrow. After the convergence, very little could genuinely surprise her. "We have, stumbled upon a new civilization. Young, barely spacefaring. There is concern from some parties about their potential development. Impulsive, emotionally volatile, and with, shall we say, a concerning fondness for weaponry." Tanaka coughed delicately. "In short," he continued, "they remind some of the more hawkish factions of humanity in its early days. The Council believes that your unique understanding of our species, as well as your demonstrated appreciation for alternative perspectives, may prove invaluable." Xylara felt a surge of a feeling she hadn't experienced in decades, true excitement tinged with a hint of apprehension. "You want me to?" Tanaka finished her thought. "Teach them to play, Dr. Xylara. Perhaps even teach ourselves a few new tricks along the way." The new civilization was a whirlwind of color, noise, and defiance that made humanity seem staid by comparison. Their art was violent, their music physically painful to her sensitive ears, and their attempts at diplomacy often devolved into shouting matches or what worryingly resembled the early stages of ritualized combat. Xylara felt the familiar clench of disapproval, the urge to categorize, analyze, and impose some semblance of order upon the beautiful chaos. Then, she remembered the Rubik's Cube, its deceptive simplicity, the joy found in the process, not just the solution. Confusion reigned at first, then a spark of angry frustration in their multifaceted eyes. They seemed to see it as a test, a puzzle laid out for them to solve, to master. Xylara held her ground, offering no solutions, no guidance, merely the tools and the space for unstructured exploration. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A young artist, dismissive and sullen, picked up the paints. His first attempts mirrored his species, aggressive splashes of color, a violent expression of barely contained rage onto the canvas. Yet, with each subsequent session, his strokes softened. One day, Xylara found him humming tunelessly along with the jarring human music recordings. He hadn't become less angry, but found a new means to express it. She returned to the Vektri homeworld, not with a neat set of findings to be presented to the council, but with a question. The council, now including younger members who had been part of the initial experiment, convened in the great chamber. Xylara stood before them, feeling the familiar weight of their combined focus, yet infused with a calmness she had not known in her youth. "Respected council," Xylara began, "I return from my assignment not with answers, but a plea for further exploration. This new civilization, much like humanity in its early phases, is a species driven by powerful, often destructive emotions. Their potential is undeniable, for great good or catastrophic harm." She gestured towards a display, not of charts or linguistic analysis, but images. A young alien standing before his canvas, his face a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. A group of diplomats locked in heated debate, their voices raised, yet no weapons drawn. A crude sculpture, depicting not a heroic figure or historical event, but a moment of shared laughter. "I cannot teach them to be like us," Xylara admitted, "nor do I think we should. Their fire, dangerous though it may be, is the essence of their unique potential. The humans, for all their faults, taught us to embrace the beauty of imperfection, to find joy in the act of creation itself, not just its outcome. What I propose is a new type of experiment." She met Counselor Alara's narrowed gaze. "We send our artists, our poets, our most daring thinkers. We teach them, not to stifle their fire, but to channel it, to forge it into something that may frighten us, that may eternally defy our sense of order, but has the potential to move mountains, or perhaps even stir the stars." The silence was heavy. This was more radical than her initial fumbling exploration of human toys. She saw the hesitation in Raval's eyes, the lingering disapproval in the elder counselors. Yet, a flicker of excitement sparked in the younger members, the ones who had painted, who had sung off-key, who had dared to question the old ways. Chiral, bolder than ever, spoke. "Respected counselors, Dr. Xylara began this journey. It is time we followed her lead. We are Vektri. We seek knowledge, understanding. It would be the height of arrogance to believe we have nothing left to learn." The debate lasted for hours. Yet, in the end, Xylara's plea was answered, not with resounding approval, but with a tenuous agreement. A pilot program, a cautious venture into a collaborative experiment, even more daring than the first. The project did not yield immediate results. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, even a regrettable incident involving a sculpture made of a highly unstable alloy that resulted in a minor diplomatic crisis. Yet, the images sent back were undeniable. Alien music that evolved from dissonance towards a strange, haunting beauty. Poems echoing with raw emotion, translated with painstaking care by hybrid teams of Vektri linguists and human philosophers. Sculptures inspired by the sleek geometry of Vektri technology, yet infused with a sense of urgency, of barely contained energy that was breathtakingly new. Xylara stood in her apartment, once a place of solitary study, now adorned with her own hesitant attempts at painting and several truly terrible Vektri-inspired poems scribbled in the margins of data logs. On her display, an image flickered, a delegation of alien diplomats, their faces set in stubborn lines, standing before a colossal mural. The work was jarring, unsettling, yet undeniably powerful. She traced the lines of color, a chaotic mix of both species' techniques, and recognized a reflection of her own journey. Chiral poked his head in, an unfamiliar hesitancy in his manner. "Dr. Xylara, a transmission from Counselor Rival. It's urgent." With a flicker of anxiety, she followed. Whatever news he brought, it couldn't be good. Rival looked weary, lines etched deep into his face. "Xylara, the program, it has exceeded our wildest predictions. The aliens, they are changing, with startling speed. Their art, their philosophy, even their governance structures are being influenced by our exchange." He motioned to a display, showing the alien equivalent of their governing council. Heated debate raged, yet there was a focus, even a grudging respect amongst the participants that chilled her. "They are learning from us," Rival said heavily, "not just about art, but about process, iterative thinking, the value of dissent, the grudging acceptance of the chaotic path towards a solution." He looked up at her, worry and a strange spark of hope in his eyes. "They are becoming more efficient, more focused. Their technological progress in the last cycle alone rivals our own advancements over several decades. They have always possessed the fire Xylara, but now—" He didn't finish the thought. They both knew. The student, unpredictable and fueled by the passionate chaos, now possessed the tools to outstrip the teacher, whose greatest strength had always been carefully tempered order. Fear. That was her first reaction, a primal echo of the old certainty that had nearly destroyed her. Then, an unexpected sense of calm descended. The humans had taught her that, had they not? The galaxy was vast, filled with the unknown and the unknowable. Control was an illusion, but within the beautiful madness of existence, there was always the potential for surprise, for wonder, even for a kind of terrible joy. "Let us call a grand symposium," she said softly, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. "It is time we face this change we have wrought together." The symposium was unlike any in Vektri history. The old guard raged, their warnings echoing Xylara's early cries of doom. The younger generations, those who had grown up in a world forever altered by a rubber duck and a Polaroid camera, met their fear with an odd kind of defiance. Humans, once a source of amusement and grudging respect, were now figures of awe and more than a little apprehension. Xylara stood before the assembly, not as a great innovator, but as a scientist who had dared to embrace the most unscientific of principles, the acceptance of the unexpected. Change was coming, a change the careful, meticulous Vektri had unwittingly set in motion. It could be a disaster, or the catalyst that pushed them from a species of knowledge to a species of true understanding. She thought of the alien child standing before his rage-filled painting, finding a new language for his fear. She thought of the laughter during the custard incident, the sheer audacity of the convergence. She thought of finger painting beside her young colleagues and the quiet hours in her apartment filled with music that still grated on her ears, yet stirred something vital within her. Then Xylara smiled and began to speak. "We have prided ourselves," Xylara began, her voice resonating through the grand chamber, "on our pursuit of knowledge, our mastery of the physical world, our carefully structured paths towards ever greater understanding. Yet," she continued, "in our pursuit of order, we have nearly lost sight of something vital. The humans, once dismissed as illogical, unpredictable, taught us a lesson we are only now beginning to grasp. We sought the solution to the puzzle that was humanity," Xylara said, "and found that the puzzle itself was the point. Their strength lies not in the destination, but in the journey. In the iterative process, the willingness to explore, to fail spectacularly, and to try again. They have taught us, however unwillingly, the strange, vital beauty of imperfection. Murmurs filled the chamber. Xylara rose, her voice sharp. And now we face the consequences. An alien race fueled by their chaotic energy, armed with our knowledge, adapting with terrifying speed. What you call beauty, Xylara, is a wildfire waiting to consume us. Xylara met her gaze unflinchingly. Perhaps, the galaxy needs a little fire. We have grown stagnant, Xylara. Our relentless pursuit of efficiency has led to a kind of stasis, a fear of the unknown that stifles true innovation. Counselor Rival cleared his throat. Xylara's experiment was dangerous, yet undeniably fruitful. Our own society is evolving, for better or worse. His smile was wry. We even found untapped potential in custard-based weaponry, a most unexpected development. Light laughter rippled through the hall, easing some of the tension. The debate raged for days. The old guard clung to their fear, painting images of doom and galactic conquest. The younger Vektri, inspired by the possibilities, argued for continued engagement, for a collaborative venture into the unknown. In the end, a compromise, the ever-present heart of Vektri governance, was reached. The exchange program would continue, but rigorously monitored and expanded to include tactical experts, strategic analysts, and those well-versed in the art of negotiation honed over centuries of tense interplanetary relations. Xylara returned to her work, but it was no longer the same. The alien delegation now housed within their borders included artists, philosophers, poets. Their collaborations were often tense, filled with misunderstandings and moments of near-comic misinterpretation. Yet, the sheer energy of their exchange was contagious. Vektri art evolved, incorporating the bold, emotive strokes of their alien collaborators, yet retaining the underlying scientific structure that was uniquely their own. A joint diplomatic team, composed of disciplined Vektri strategists and passionately argumentative aliens, achieved breakthroughs on a trade agreement that had stalled for decades. The music, the poetry, the sheer creative chaos was at times unbearable, often baffling, but undeniably alive. Xylara was summoned by Ambassador Tanaka. The human looked older, his easy humor tempered by a newfound gravitas. "Well, Doctor," he said with a wry smile, "you have outdone yourself. This latest batch of diplomats, they could out-argue the most stubborn Earth politician." "Yet, there's a focus," Xylara observed. "They channel that fire of theirs. It's," she hesitated, "impressive, and somewhat terrifying." Tanaka laughed. "Believe it or not, the feeling is mutual. Your Vektri have always been formidable. Now, with a dash of unpredictability, the galaxy may need to rewrite its rulebook." He leaned forward, his tone growing serious. "Change is messy, Xylara. It breeds conflict, even with the best intentions. But without it, we stagnate. Your willingness to shake the foundations of your world, however inadvertently," Tanaka shook his head. "Let's just say humanity owes you a debt we may never be able to repay." In her final years, Dr. Xylara, the Vektri scientist who had nearly been censured for studying a child's toy, was known not for groundbreaking discoveries, but for her role as a mediator, a translator, a bridge between the relentlessly analytical society she was born into and the vibrant, chaotic forces they had helped unleash upon the galaxy. She walked the streets of her homeworld, no longer a place of sterile order, but alive with vibrant murals, the echo of music both haunting and dissonant, debates raging in public squares with an intensity that would have once horrified her. Yet, within it all, she saw a relentless pursuit of knowledge tempered by a willingness to leap into the unknown. The Vektri were still Vektri, but forever changed. Late one night, Cairo, now a respected researcher in his own right, found her in her apartment. Her collection of truly terrible paintings was stashed away, replaced by a single canvas, a swirling mix of human and Vektri techniques, an explosion of color and geometric lines that somehow, impossibly, worked. "It's not finished," she told him, a slightly wistful note in her voice. "I don't think it ever will be." He gave her a knowing look. "The process, Dr. Xylara? That's the whole point, isn't it?" Xylara smiled. "Perhaps it always was."